We need a fake green Cold War where the nations compete against each other to solve climate change. We need like a conspiracy between Russia, China, and America where they all just agree to pretend like they're in a Cold War, and then get ready like the capitalists and the populists and get all that money and labor working to fix the problem.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Trolling with Logic, where we bring the hammer down on ignorance, unreason, and superstition on a weekly basis. I'm Nathan Dickey, your host, and Cal is the only one with me today as the other regular host. How's it going, Cal?
It's great, and you're actually saying weekly without having to double check yourself there. So you managed to get that down smoothly now.
Yep, so that's a good sign going forward. Today we welcome as our special guest Miles Greb. Miles is one of the biggest sci-fi and fantasy nerds I know, and as well as a comic writer, folk singer, and science outreach advocate. He's created and written a few science and skepticism based comics in the optimistic sci-fi tradition, including Clovis and After the Gold Rush. Welcome to the show, Miles Greb.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it. And most of what you said is true, and the rest is exaggeration.
Oh, okay. And I guess we'll get into that clarification later on in the course of the show, I'm sure. Let's start off with a little of your background and where you're coming from. Have you always been into comics, sci-fi, fantasy, that kind of thing?
Probably. So my very first comic I ever got was my grandma bought me the first Marvel trade paperback. It was a collection of number ones, like Fantastic Four #1 and Journey into Mystery, Amazing Fantasies 15. And she got me that at a yard sale when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And ever since then, I really loved comics. But I was kind of poor growing up, so I couldn't always get them. So I was always like scavenging at yard sales or Goodwill to find them. But I've been a comic fan as soon as I knew what they were and, had the ability to acquire them.
Cool. What would you say is the main value in comics and or graphic novels as a medium for storytelling?
Sure. Why I love comics so much is you get to have a visual and storytelling medium. But unlike film, which is in a lot of ways superior as a visual medium, you don't have as quite a big of budgets, so you don't have as many cooks in the kitchen. So it is kind of selected to be more creative in that way. Because, if you're making a film for $10 million, you can't really afford to do something super crazy that no one's ever done before that often, because if you fail, you're out $10 million, right? It costs $3,000-$4,000 to make a single issue of a comic book. And so you're like, oh, well, we tried something new and it failed. People can still eat and don't lose their jobs afterwards. And so I think that is something that's really benefited comics for a long time, which is why they're harvested by Hollywood so much now, I think. I also like the really intimate nature of comic books. Because, you spend a lot of time with the series. It comes out every couple of months, and you pick up the issue, and then you read it alone, and there's lots of details there, and they always kind of build on themselves in a more complicated way, even than a novel, because a novel can make sure to point things out to you. They're like, hey, don't forget that we've been mentioning this over time. But in a comic, there's a lot of visual clues, so you really need to have a relationship with the work to get everything out of it.
Yeah, what you're kind of saying is there's a lot more subtlety to a comic than a novel.
Yeah, I mean, not always. There's 90s comics where it's just big muscle man versus the dumb ninjas. Yeah. And he saves, big titty girl, and then it ends. But the medium is capable of doing a lot more.
So let's get into the project you're currently working on. Give us a rundown of kind of the inception of After the Gold Rush and what it's all about.
Sure. After the Gold Rush is the first comic I ever made. I made it about 2 years ago, and it's kind of the one that's most close to my heart. So basically, I was at Emerald City Comic Con, which is a really big con up here. And, there's like this big trend in comics to be more inclusive to all these groups and kind of like add a voice to people who don't have them. And I was walking around and I didn't see any books that were openly atheist books, no books talking about skepticism. I didn't see a single book that was really focused on science. Of course, everybody has cool feats of engineering on the kind of general sci-fi trend, but no book was kind of like, this is what the scientific method is. These are people who, have a history in science. Nothing was actually talking about it as a methodology. And so I was like, well, damn, I think I could do that. And so I started, working and creating the concept for After the Gold Rush. And then I sold off my magic collection to get enough money to pay some artists to help me with concept art. And then I was really lucky to get on Skeptic's Guide to the Universe when I was just kind of kicking it off. And thankfully, because of that, a lot of people paid attention to it. And the first Kickstarter went really well, and now we're making the series. The series itself, After the Gold Rush, like I said, it's about skepticism, atheism, and hard science. It follows Scout. She's the last scientist. And she grew up on Titan, but something went wrong, and so she's put into cryosleep. But then her ship automatically sends her back to Earth. So her ship, the Beagle 2, takes a long journey from Titan back to Earth, and then she arrives. But she doesn't find it this kind of Star Trek utopia like she was expecting. It is a really lush wilderness. It's not a post-apocalyptic world. Something else has happened. But there's been a major paradigm shift. So Scout, who knows a lot about biology and chemistry, is going to have to try to figure out what to do in this world and see if she can help return science. But she's just a 16-year-old girl. She's pretty socially awkward, so she's going to have a hard time relating to these people who have no idea what science is, especially since they're pretty superstitious and believe in a lot of magical thinking. And she's never even really heard of religion or any of the kind of superstitions that we might know of today. And that's the rundown.
All right.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating premise.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, and I've read the first issue and thought it was pretty impressive. I like the idea of the main character not falling into kind of the pop culture stereotype trope of the doctor scientist.
Yeah, doctor scientist, yeah.
Yeah, she actually has a specialty. She's a biologist, is that correct?
Yep, she's a biologist and she knows a bunch of chemistry too, because she basically, her main role was to genetically engineer plants to try to survive in Titan's atmosphere, which is, a hard task. But that is her role. So most of the science she knows is based upon agriculture and bioengineering.
Yeah, I was going to mention the GMO aspect as well. That I believe it's only on one page, but I loved the kind of cameo appearance that it made, the genetically modified stuff.
Yeah, I'm trying not to be heavy-handed about it, which is just like, fuck yeah, GMOs. But, it'll definitely come up in the story more. Also, there's a little prequel webcomic that I made where you can see her actually using an advanced version of CRISPR that I call Cold Snap to genetically modify her plants. For example, she's trying to add B-carotenes into her plants in order to strengthen them, hopefully resist the high levels of nitrogen that are in the atmosphere. So, I'm sprinkling as much hard science in as I can.
Yeah, and I really geeked out at the reference to Mary Anning, the paleontologist from the 18th century. I thought that was pretty brilliant, and was even more excited when I got to the end and saw the spread at the end. Well, not the spread, but the full page
Splash.
Full page splash at the end, giving a little bit more info. I think that's a great way to introduce lesser known figures and lesser known big names in science.
Yeah.
Or people who should be big names but aren't.
Sure. Yeah. So like every issue, we're going to have a scientist of the issue. Normally they're like in some way related to what happened in the story. So, I've always really liked Mary Anning. So, she's the first one, and Stalk is the second one. And then I think the third book we do Rosalina Frank. So
awesome.
I wanted to ask, is it quite difficult kind of translate the scientific method, which can be to a lot of outside folk, if you show them what goes on in a lab every day, this is quite dry and boring. Is that quite a challenge to represent in a graphic novel in an exciting way?
So I have her do some actual science in the webcomic more, because she's back on Titan, and the way I translate it, you can be pretty expressive with her faces. So luckily I have artists that can do that. She's working on her experiment. I have her looking over all of her data. One of the samples doesn't work and she has absolutely no idea why. So you can kind of show the exacerbations of that. You can show a lot of the emotions of it. And of course, she's just standing in the lab looking at figures a lot, but you can show the kind of moments around that, like the feelings of her victories and successes. And also, I have a section where she talks about how important it is for her to fail at her studies and to not let that matter, because, every time you fail, if you she's not really publishing, but essentially if you're publishing your negative studies, you're still finding out information, because that's how we got the light bulb. Edison just tried a million different things funding wise and published all the research until we found out what would work. So it's totally fine to fail in science. And so, I mean, like, that's a way you can talk about it. So there's lots of different ways you can sprinkle in enough emotion to make the story interesting and still be scientific.
All right, cool.
At least I hope it's interesting.
Yeah.
And you focus on the optimistic sci-fi tradition. So is that something you prefer over the more pessimistic dystopian sci-fi out there? Or is there something to be said about dystopian sci-fi as well?
Sure. So I just think cynicism isn't an evidence-based position. I mean, if you look at all the data, things get better across the board all the time. There's never been a better century to be born in than this one. Life expectancies are up, knowledge rates are up, equality is up, internet speeds are up, so that's good. Obviously there's this or that could have been better 10, 12 years ago or whatever, but on a century level, everything gets better every single century. And so I think it's kind of too bad that science fiction has become dead focused on how we're going to kill ourselves and how everything we built is going to, fade away because of our own failures. I think it is good to have warnings like that. And art as a warning is important. And there's tons of fantastic and important kind of more cynical sci-fi stories that I love and have shaped me, and I'm very glad it exists. But they are the vast majority, and there's not really a good amount of optimistic science fiction out there anymore. Star Trek is gone, and who knows if it'll ever actually return. And I think that's really disappointing. The Fantastic Four have been swept away because of corporate rights, so they're not in Marvel, and there's no Star Trek. And I mean, where are the people saying the future's going to be better? I mean, that's what inspired so many people that work for NASA, and I think it's a shame that doesn't exist anymore. So, I'm just making a indie comic, so I can't bring it all back, but hopefully somebody will like what I'm doing and that has more talent and money than me, and they'll do something else, and maybe it can cascade.
Yeah, I hope so, because I was going to mention Star Trek because that's really the only franchise I can think of that really went for the optimistic angle.
Yeah, because even look at that, like something like Battlestar Galactica. The original incarnation of that was very upbeat and optimistic, and then the reboot was just so dark and miserable. It was fantastic, but it was really dark
great,
and miserable.
But it is very dark and miserable. That's it's kind of a Mormon propaganda, the original Battlestar.
The original one, yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas I think the reboot's definitely 9/11, post 9/11 in space, basically.
Yeah. I mean, and that probably had a lot to do with the new wave of cynicism,
Yeah.
That and the never-ending wars in the Middle East and the economic crisis and stuff, and people just feeling more disconnected for whatever reason. And, there's logical reasons why, you see so much dystopia, but, like, people need to stop making fucking zombie books.
Yeah,
That's all I'm
definitely.
saying. Like, it's just like, I mean, everyone's so fixated on every little problem. It's just such a shame, especially like it exacerbates on things like Twitter, where, an anomalous problem can occur. And if it's mimetic enough, it just spreads like wildfire. And now, like, we have a giant problem that's X, even if it's, an outlier. And I just wish people would focus on all the really good work that people do, because it's hard work to make the world a more fair and balanced place and to, cultivate all this knowledge we have, and I don't think it's celebrated enough.
Yeah, so why do you think sci-fi's always tended towards dystopia?
Well, like I said, for modern reasons, but I think that part of it is, I mean, technologies are, especially the paradigm-shifting ones, can be concerning to people because they don't know where they fit in. I mean, automation's going to happen, right? And we don't know how we're going to deal with automation as, a free market economy. And so, I mean, that's scary, right? I mean, maybe it'd be great, but maybe it won't be. People didn't know what radiation is or was, and they made all kinds of stories about, oh my God, radiation's going to destroy us. And I mean, for example, radiation, yes, radiation's bad. Radiation that you're likely to acquire in your daily life won't really affect you. Low doses of alpha rays aren't going to hurt you. And so we get people freaking out because of this sci-fi. So like Fukushima happens, nobody dies because of the radiation. The meltdown's mostly contained, but then there's small alpha rays that go into the Pacific Ocean and people freak out about it. The science doesn't say they should freak out about it. but they do because of science fiction's track record all these years, which is sad because then it makes people against nuclear power, even though the information is very clear that it's the safest and most reliable form of sustainable energy we have, and then people have bad policies. So that's why I think it's important to have optimistic and science-based science fiction, because that way you can spread actual knowledge about science instead of just fear upon fear, which actually does affect people. So.
Yeah, totally agree with that. So what are some of the challenges you found in bringing science to the humanities? Because a lot of people treat the science in the humanities as non-overlapping magisteria, to borrow a phrase from Stephen Jay Gould, like they're not supposed to meet or touch.
Well, one of the things I do is I actually try to get everything in the story peer reviewed. It's peer reviewed by the fans. There's a section that if I make any scientific mistakes, you can write in and I'll print a correction in the next issue. And I also have different friends with, varying PhDs who I run everything by. Like if there's biology, I ask Kevin Foltz, I'm like, hey, bud, does this make sense? Or do you think that this is something I can reasonably say, bioengineering can do in 400 years? And I try to make it all based on that. Now, I am likely, and I probably have gotten things wrong. And I think the thing about the humanities is, you write your story and that's it. Unless you're losers like the Mass Effect guys and you change it because fans bitch, you normally let your story just be your story. I'm not going to change what happened in post, but if there is any scientific mistakes, there will be a section in the back, and I'll fix them and point to saying, hey, we messed this up. This shouldn't have happened. And I think that is kind of a bridge between science and the humanities. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's not never the two shall meet between the science and the humanities, but of course there is always a wall there because, one is based on your imagination and one's based upon trying to remove your imagination and interpret the data as it is. But that doesn't mean you can't tell a story about that. You just have to be careful.
Yeah, I think Carl Sagan put it well when he said, was it in Cosmos, that in order to explore and understand the universe, we need imagination and skepticism both. And he was kind of, I think, maybe the pioneer in combining those two approaches with concepts like his spaceship of the imagination that he incorporated into his series Cosmos. And I think that's kind of the tradition I see you continuing along in.
Yeah, Cosmos is, pretty obviously a major inspiration for After the Gold Rush. I started the first page with a line from Sagan. Yeah, I mean, no one does Psychom like Sagan, right? So
yeah,
he's just the best there. And so that, and obviously Roddenberry and Fantastic Four are all really big inspirations for the story. Kind of the way the main bad guy thinks is more inspired by like Frank Herbert and Dune, but he hasn't been introduced too much yet into the story. So the Kickstarter for number 3 is live right now, and you see a little bit of him in number 3, but he doesn't have his big kind of moment until issue 4. So
okay.
Yeah, and we'll obviously put a link to your Kickstarter campaign, but feel free to talk about it now and tell us how it's going.
Yeah, it's going really well. Thankfully, like a lot of publishers won't really print a book that says that it's an openly atheist book. I've been told by Marvel that, like they can have atheist characters, but it kind of has to be ho-hum. But luckily, in indie comics, I can do whatever the hell I want. And so there's been a lot of people very supportive of the book. A lot of people are happy to see an atheist character. A lot of people are happy to see just the actual science content or the skepticism. And then I think some people don't care about any of that and just like Scout and all the awesome artists that work on the book. So thankfully it's doing well. We're funded. We're trying to reach our stretch goals now. So it's 19 days to go. You can just Google After the Gold Rush on Kickstarter. It's up there. We're in the projects they like section, so you'll find it. Or you can go to like at Gold Rush Comic, which is my Twitter, and I'm always spamming it out, so you can see it there. If people are interested in the book, you can grab all 3 copies for just $25. And you can also get, art prints, or we have scarves or buttons or pins or art commissions, all that kind of stuff. So feel free to check out the book. And if I get any of the science wrong, feel free to write me an angry letter.
But I was going to say there, you mentioned there is really still a lot of pushback from publishers about having openly atheist characters in works.
Yeah, Marvel won't allow characters to say they're an atheist.
Yeah, so it's kind of quite surprising to me that.
The social justice movement, for all that it does, isn't really interested in atheist representation, so there's not a lot of allies for that. I know a lot of the major Marvel writers are atheists. I talk to them, But yeah, the publishers, I mean, so there are atheist characters. Ms. Marvel says she's an atheist. Reed is an atheist. Iron Man's an atheist. But they don't say it. They'll never say the word. They'll never be clear about it. It's always kind of ho-hum, because I don't know, we're still really negative. People don't really care if you're not religious that much. Some people will, but most won't. But if you say you're an atheist, it's somehow much different.
Yeah, it's a dirty A word.
Yeah, because it's like, to bring up Star Trek, I mean, 90% of the characters in Star Trek, they pretty much are atheists, so they almost say it, but they won't actually say the word. But, Star Trek's still embraced by everyone, which just shows, people can embrace a character regardless of that.
Yeah, it's not so much the aspect, it's just the word, which, is kind of silly.
Yeah.
So you've written a few other comics as well. One that I find particularly interesting because whereas After the Gold Rush is set in, was it the 25th century?
Yep.
Clovis, your second comic, I believe, is set 14,000 years ago.
Yep. Yeah.
Tell us about that comic.
Yeah, so Clovis is set in the Pleistocene era, the time of megafauna in North America. And it follows a young mother named Maya. She is of the Clovis people, although culturally she's independent of them. The Clovis were essentially the predecessor to what we would call Native Americans. So they were here, and they had, their own culture, and they would hunt the megafauna of the time. The story begins when she buries, who is a historical person, Anzik, her son. We see the actual artifacts that were at the dig site where we recovered Anzik. And she sees, after burying him, this plume of smoke in the distance. And she doesn't know what it is because she's left by herself, so she thinks it's some kind of sign. So she begins following this trail of smoke across the wilderness, and we see the landscapes and all the awesome flora and fauna that existed in North America at that time. Eventually, she comes across this bulking, massive creature who she thinks is a no-face bear, which were these giant super predator bears that lived, but actually it wasn't. It was Megatherium, which are these giant sloths. So she ends up befriending the giant sloth, who acts a bit more charismatic than is scientifically accurate, but I think that's just kind of a give me. And so then they go across the wilderness together looking for her lost son. That's kind of where the story starts. We kickstarted that one a while ago. It's going to be a full graphic novel, 100 pages with a bunch of science info in the back, kind of like Zoo Books, if anyone remembers Zoo Books. But we got a 22-page preview issue out now, so you can buy that on my website, or you could check out some of the art.
I had a question, but I just lost it. Sometimes I blink out.
That's all right.
It's all right. So is it? Have you only worked with the Kickstarted self-published comics? Have you actually done any traditionally published comics?
No, it's all independent. So After the Gold Rush was my first, and then luckily it did really well. That's kind of my big hit, I guess. And so, then I did Clovis, and so that did pretty well. And it should be out at the end of the year, is my hope.
Yeah.
And then I've done Espers, which is a Croatian mythology. It's like a comic theology. And then I have my free webcomic, Puck the Artist, which is a younger adventure story.
Yeah, it was just myself and Nathan were speaking last night, and we actually broached the topic of being self-published via going with a publisher, and I think some people might have a romanticized view of what being self-published is. I mean, is it a lot of hard work to be self-published compared to? I mean, I know it'll be kind of second-hand info you'll have on going through a publisher, but is it a bit harder work because the route you've taken, do you think?
Oh, it's a lot of work, man, because I just laying out the book to get it to the printer and everything is a bunch of work. I have to do all the work to research the science, write the story, get it edited, go through the inks and the colors and the letters and everything with my team. Then after that, we have all the pages in PDF, and you have to make them ready for print. So there's bleed areas and all this math you have to learn, which is not fun. And we get that done, send it to the printer. Then we get all of our books, and then I got to manage all the money and do the shipping. And, sell 1,000 books, that's a lot of shipping. And some of them are to Australia or Zanzibar or wherever. And so there's a bunch of international shipping you have to do, which takes more time. It's a bunch of hassle. Yeah. But, I get to make the book I want, and I have complete creative control. So that's pretty good.
Whereas if you went through the traditional route, you have to sacrifice some of the creative control, but, kind of the weight's taken off your shoulder in some areas as well, yeah.
Yeah, so Image is much more relaxed, for example, on their creator-owned books. But still, I wouldn't get to do whatever I wanted, and I'm not sure if I could. I mean, I'm not heavy-handed about it. I'm not just like yelling atheism all the time in the book, but I do want to be able to mention that if I want to, and I don't want that to be restricted. So
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Going back to Clovis and thinking about the kind of the premise, I'm thinking about similar stories in the past. Would you say it kind of falls into the Clan of the Cave Bear type tradition of storytelling?
yeah, you could say that. It's a little different though. I think you'll have to read it to find out.
Okay. And it's my understanding scientists, anthropologists don't actually know much about the Clovis people. Do you take some creative license with that, or did you just kind of...
So I've intentionally put Maya, who's the protagonist, outside of the Clovis culture. She herself is, genetically she's of those people, but she lives by herself. So, what she does is kind of her own thing more than, she's like strictly of, those people. That way, I'm not trying to like make up anthropology. So I've tried to be kind of as mum about that stuff as I can, as to not just be bullshitting. But obviously I have to make up a little bit because, we don't know that much about them. But we do know some things. We know the way that they hunted most likely because we have a lot of their weapons. And so, I'll use the information I can. And there's different anthropologists that are helping me with the book. So hopefully the information is good.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So do you plan to maybe in the future go into other areas of science? And it seems you've leaned kind of heavily on the life sciences. Do you plan to go for it maybe in future ones that incorporate more physics?
That's a good question. So I know more about the life sciences because I was trying to become a bioengineer, but it's hard. I don't have a lot of time because I'm a computer engineer by trade. And then I started writing these books, and after the gold rush kind of took off, so I've been so busy I haven't been able to finish a bioengineering degree. Yeah, I mean, so there will be more physics that show up in after the gold rush. Scout isn't an expert in physics, so you have to see how that happens because, she knows her maths, but not well enough to be a master in physics, So we'll see that come up as the society starts to rebuild eventually. But I'll have to get some good physicists to help me with that to make sure I get it right, because I'm certain I'll fuck that up by myself.
Just purely out of self-interest, he said the society is going to be built up. So does that mean there's going to be engineers? Because I'm an engineer and I would love to see engineering portrayed in a realistic way. So
yeah, there'll definitely be engineering in the book eventually. There's going to be some really bad engineering in issue 5. So. Yeah. You want to see some bad engineering, it'll be there. But yes, there will be a bunch of different kinds of sciences. Like I said, and you guys mentioned, Scout isn't that doctor scientist who just knows every field. So, but she has that little thing she turns on her UI that's kind of like an encyclopedia, and so she can research stuff, but she's gonna have to learn it and hopefully teach other people. So,
all right.
Cool. And you also do, outside your comic writing, scientific outreach and activism, and you were involved with the March for Science this year. Yep. Do you do this kind of scientific outreach only once in a while when there's a big event going on, or is this more of a full-time thing for you?
Well, I try to do it with the book, of course. But yeah, I've write blogs about, although I'm busy, so I can't write as many as I'd like, different scientific issues. Like GMOs is a major one for me because I try to talk about issues that I think we can convince the left on more, just because it's kind of the people in my wheelhouse. So I try to talk to them about issues that they tend to be wrong on. So like, it's not that like the left is anti-GMO and the right is pro-anti-GMO, for example, but the left is more anti-GMO than you would expect based upon their typical pro-science motifs that they believe they have. So I like to talk about that a lot, and I participate as much as I can in those conversations. And also say with like nuclear power is a big one I care about. But for the March for Science, I was the organizer for the Seattle March for Science, and I was one of the people on the national team helping organize the whole event. And, that was a pretty tiring process. It took about 3 months, and I also had a book coming out, and I had to delay one book, and didn't really get to sleep. But, Donald Trump put a climate change denying creationist in charge of the EPA, and then tried to defund science across the board and say, what are we supposed to do? We have to do something.
Yeah, sleep is overrated anyway.
Yeah, I do tend to like it when I get it, but it seems a rarity.
So, as a kind of outsider to all of this, I mean,
Mhm.
how bad is the science situation in the US since the election last year? Is it as bleak as some are making out?
I think that we will be able to endure because a lot of it is
Yeah.
funding, which is disappointing. And people who have had projects for a long time, if they get them canceled, that's pretty, that's pretty shitty. But I mean, nothing that he has done can't really be overturned by political action. We'll have a
Yeah.
midterm in 2018, and if we can make the House blue, then there'll be a firewall against a lot of his bullshit. So yeah, it's a damn problem, but it's not nothing we can't solve. It's just another engineering problem. It's just a social engineering problem. So hopefully people will be sufficiently motivated to do something about this, and then I think we can be on track and get back into the Paris Agreement. Although I want other countries to know, yes, unfortunately America has idiotically decided to leave the Paris Agreement. America is made up of 50 states and a federal government, and a lot of the states don't agree with the federal government, and they will be participating. For example, Washington, where I'm from, we are in every way going to work with the Accords and not against them. The same with California. So
Because I've actually heard that in polling, the attitudes towards climate change, it's actually fairly evenly spread. It's not, because for me outside, you would think the whole of the US, they're just nuts against climate change and just oppose it across the board.
no, I believe the majority opinion is that people think it is happening. I believe it's 69% of people believe that the greenhouse effect is an actual thing that's warming the Earth. So it is the majority of us. But Donald Trump won, by the way, in a really low turnout election. So it's kind of an anomaly. Hillary Clinton had more popular votes, but we award based on states. So you win a state and you get the points. And his turnout was really high in some areas where typically Republicans aren't. And Democrats just didn't come out to vote very much. So he won a kind of a outlier election. So yeah, it's true that America right now at a federal level isn't supporting very important things like climate change as much as we would like. That isn't the majority of the American people's opinion, and that won't remain that way. There'll be political change in a couple of years.
Yeah, one of the criticisms I hear a lot of people who are misinformed about it bring up with regard to things like the March for Science is they complain that, it's not about science, it's about politics. And I think they're kind of missing the point there, because science is never partisan, but it's always political, because science is about gaining knowledge, and knowledge is power, and what you do with that knowledge is always political.
Yeah, especially when science is funded, right? So if your science is funded by people who accumulate public funds, then automatically it's political. And the implication of the science is political. I mean, if they won't let us build nuclear power plants or use salt mine nuclear depository technology, or won't let us use stem cells, or won't let us use, policing methods that have better evidentiary basis than other ones, or teaching methods that, are demonstrated to be more effective because of people's kind of intuitions or opinions instead of the science, I mean, then it becomes political. It's unfortunate that we have to have these debates with people who don't value evidence-based positions as much as, some of us science folk would, but that's how it goes. And if you ignore that process, then you lose. And I don't want to lose.
Yeah, because the whole thing when people say, science isn't political, you only need to look back to the 60s when it was extremely political. The whole space race was essentially political posturing. But yet it was responsible for huge leaps in science at the time.
Well, we don't go to the moon without the Cold War. We just don't. So,
I mean, it's one thing like, I'm currently studying my engineering degree, and they all say that. A few of my tutors say, like, the best thing is a war or Cold War. It'll be the best thing for our jobs anyway, because we'll be in high demand there.
Yeah.
Sadly.
We need a fake green Cold War where the nations compete against each other to solve climate change. We need like a conspiracy between Russia, China, and America where they all just agree to pretend like they're in a Cold War, and then get ready like the capitalists and the populists and get all that money and labor working to fix the problem.
Yeah, basically, you need something like China to say that it's built the biggest wind turbine and it's employed 100 people. Then America goes, well, we can build one bigger that employed twice as many.
Yeah, we have this unfortunate situation where a couple states that are kind of can go either way. They're not super right wing or super left wing. That happens to be where the coal is, and
Yeah.
so the Republicans can be like, "Oh, coal people, we love you, we care about your jobs," and the Democrats don't, and so then they can like get those points,
Yeah.
and so it makes it so like the coal workers are way overrepresented in American politics, and so that's kind of been a problem for us.
I also think a kind of problem the green movement has is it always comes across as well. You can't use your car. You can't do this. Don't do this. Don't do that. And people can get just a bit worn down, just being told what they can't do all the time.
Yeah,
rather than be told you can get an electric car, which is a lot more powerful than your petrol. It doesn't have as much range, but it'll do you for 90% of your journeys most of the time.
I'm not a big fan of the environmentalist movement. I obviously agree with a lot of their goals, but I think essentially all their tactics are wrong, and I don't think they're very science-based, which was a hard thing when I was running the Science March, because a lot of these groups like Sierra Club and Greenpeace wanted in, and I was just like, get the hell out of here. And one of the reasons I wanted to make sure I was helping with that is because, like, as a skeptic and the person who, does a lot of research in these fields, I kind of know a lot of the kind of shady tactics of the environmentalist movement that I think somebody, who isn't in this world wouldn't know, because they think, oh, well, they're good. They're trying to save the trees, right? Yeah, but these groups are anti-science, They oppose all manner of research and information they don't like just because they don't like it. And it doesn't matter if their positions are evidence-based. They just like whatever they're based.
Well, I was just talking the whole... So I was just meaning the whole climate change movement. I think they could be better in getting the message across. When you keep telling folk don't, then it can just, a lot of folk can just start shrugging their shoulders and saying, I don't care.
I don't think that ways to fix climate change that are like actions that aren't incentivized are going to be useful. Yeah. Like you're saying, so don't do things that's not useful. We need to engineer our way around the problem, like you said, with electric cars. Because you're not going to get people to just lower their consumption all the time. You either make their consumption less or more sustainable. You need proactive solutions, not ones that are just telling people not to do stuff. So I definitely agree with you.
Yeah, I think groups like the Sierra Club and especially Greenpeace, they may have started out as good organizations doing good work, but they've really lost their way, I think. And I think it's important. I really appreciate when people point that out, especially pro-science people.
The Sierra Club tried a hostile takeover of the Seattle March, but they
just out of interest, who exactly are the Sierra Club? I've never heard of this before.
Sure. So they started as Save the Trees kind of group, so that's good. We like that. They are a big environmentalist group in America. They do legitimately do some good things protecting natural lands and stuff. But they're an anti-GMO group. They've opposed things like fluoridization in water. They're anti-nuclear power, and they support a whole bunch of kind of like non-evidentiary environmentalist solutions. And they're also a super left-wing group, which I was trying to keep the march as nonpartisan as we can, because I want science to be seen as a centrist issue. If our results and our findings tend to lean left, then so be it. But I don't think it's good to preemptively politicize science. So
just out of interest, Sarah, do you get a lot of conservative support? Are you surprised, or is it as low as most people would perceive it to be?
So obviously, there's a lot of conservatives that love science and don't feel well represented by the government right now. But, the effect of tribalism is really strong. And so you're going to see them just kind of be upset with their party and still stay with their party and probably not join the March for Science. I tried my very best to reach out for them and let them know that they were invited and welcome to the march, and that, they care about science too. And it's important that they're there. And so I hope that the Seattle March had a higher degree of them in perhaps other areas per capita, because I tried my best to reach out to them. I grew up in a small Christian conservative town, so, I feel like I can relate to these people. And I know a lot of them, can sound awful when they're online, when we get in all these fights and everyone's using all their jargon. But a lot of them don't mean to be bad people. They just were raised a certain way, and they don't quite understand a lot of the nuances of the conversations. And so... Yeah. I think it's good to try to talk to them as best we can.
Yeah, because it's one thing I keep hearing, like a lot of people we interview, they say, online it gets very heated, but then they say they meet most of these people in real life, and they said they're perfectly nice folk with just concerns, and you actually have some good conversations with them.
It was Miles Power who mentioned on our show that he had a pleasant experience interacting with and talking with 9/11 truthers, but as soon as he went online, they kind of let their filters down and became horrible people.
Well, we didn't evolve to talk like that, right? I mean, like, we've gone through all these years of evolution to look at social cues, to look at facial expressions and tone of voice, and all those things are gone. And so you're in an environment that's somewhat foreign when you're talking online, So, I mean, it's great that we can talk online. We wouldn't be having this conversation without this technology. So it's not to besmirch it, but it just has drawbacks. And so I think we need to understand that, hey, complex conversations are going to be really hard to have here. And if we're going to try to have them, we have to be careful to be charitable what people say. They might say a phrase that we associate with a certain kind of emotion or feeling, but they may not mean that. So, and I think that that's what happens on Twitter a lot and other such websites. So I just wish people would be more charitable when they see online speech. And I think that would probably help us a lot as a people.
I really struggle with Twitter because I'm just one of those people who, when I have something important to say, I can't say it just in 140 characters.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I don't bitch on Twitter too much. I try to mostly just post my art, Every once in a while I'll say something, but it's kind of a hard place to have conversations. So I try not to ramble on too much, although I did bitch about some Star Wars stuff.
Oh yeah, I was going to bring this up because this is an important issue to you, and it's something I'm curious about. What's going on with Luke Skywalker in Episode 8?
Well, I don't know for sure. I just have impressions, but the impressions are scary to me. So why I care about this so much, by the way, just backstory. Star Wars is an independent film. Lucas wanted to tell an old world story in a new way. He believed he could take all these characteristics from all these different cultures and make this new version of the monomyth for America. This new kind of space fantasy story. And no one believed in him, and he didn't want to work with these big corporate people. So he made his independent film Star Wars, and obviously it was a huge hit. He took his money, he invested it back into Empire Strikes Back and made one of the best films ever made. And in this, he created this beautiful mythos of the Force. The Force is this life force that surrounds us. And the Jedi seek balance with it. It's not dogmatic. It's not religious. There's an actual working physics here that the Force has a way that it wants the universe to go to make it most beneficial for life to spread. Yeah. And the Jedi seek to serve that balance. Then there's the dark side who will use the Force in a selfish way to create this disharmony with it. It pulls on it. Think of the effects of gravity, like pulling on a grid. Mm-hmm. And so that was the way the Force works. I'm very worried in Episode 8 that it's not going to be that metaphysic anymore, but they're going to make it that, the light side and the dark side are just opinions on the right way to act, and you don't need the Jedi. The Jedi was just a dogma, it was just a cultural thing. And this whole kind of postmodernist, none of that's real, and Luke's depressed kind of thing. And to me, that just insults all the things that Lucas wanted to create with the story and successfully did. And it makes me really sad because I'm not religious, I don't have spiritual feelings anymore, even though I grew up very religious. The only time I ever really have that kind of feeling anymore is if I listen to the Skywalker theme and, I see the binary sunset, that moment to me is it's special. And to take that away and turn it down to this postmodernist, lazy, cynical route is just so depressing to me. I'm having a hard time with it. So
yeah, and also I think it just undoes a lot of what Luke Skywalker went through in the original trilogy.
He had a hard route.
It cheaply throws away a lot of the development and growing he went through.
Yeah, well, I hear a lot of people complain about Luke, that he's a whiner or he's kind of, I don't know, just a malcontent in the Episode 4, and that maybe the new creators of Star Wars are kind of absorbing that negativity about Luke and making him kind of a postmodern sulker.
So Luke's a farm boy who farms moisture boringly on a fucking desert planet. That sucks, especially when you're the most powerful person in the history of the Star Wars universe. That's a frustrating life. And so he's a little annoyed. But after that, Luke goes to the Death Star. Boom, Death Star's gone. Luke goes to Hoth. They attack with a bunch of AT-ATs. What happens? AT-ATs wiped out. No fucking problem. Luke comes in contact with Boba Fett, boom, Boba Fett's gone. Luke comes in contact with Jabba the Hutt, boom, Jabba the Hutt's gone. Goes to Endor, saves the day, beats the Emperor because he stands in front of him, and Darth Vader's like, man, my son's so damn cool, I don't want this dark side no more. Fucking Darth Vader ends up dead, and then like Luke Skywalker's number one. And so people talk shit about Luke. I'm like, did you even watch these movies, man? Luke Skywalker's the best. It's like almost impossible to train a Jedi when they're old because they have all their like biases and like emotions are all messed up because they haven't been in balance with the Force. But Luke goes to Yoda and like eats like weird little sticks and Yoda's stew and hangs out in a cave for a few days, and then he becomes a Jedi Knight Master. And I don't know, man. I just really like Luke. I don't want them to ruin him. And I try not to talk about Star Wars on podcasts, by the way, because I get all ranty and stupid.
Yeah. I was tempted to say you may not have noticed it, but your brain did. So. Yes, you got it. You got that reference. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
But, well, it's just maybe if we can stay on that. What do you make of the new Star Wars, the new Star Trek movies, the recent trilogy? Because we're talking about the kind of utopian aspect, and I feel a little bit of that's been lost in the new movies because every film just seems to end up in violent fist fights all the time.
I hated the third one a lot, and I hated the second one, and the first one was okay.
Yeah.
I mean, where's the moment in the third movie where they talked about if they were wrong or not and what they should do and what is the ethical position? I mean, that's what makes Star Trek, right? Those scenes where they sit down and talk. None of that's in these movies. There's a motorcycle. Saw that. I saw them say that the Enterprise used combustion engines in one scene. I saw them listening to literally the Beastie Boys and using them as a weapon so they could rive a bunch of ships like a wave.
And didn't they kick a hyperdrive to get it started as well?
Yeah, and then somehow they pushed a ship off a cliff to create lift, even though the ships aren't manufactured to create lift in order to get to start. I don't know, man. Don't watch that movie. Just go watch TNG or TOS again. Like, there's no reason to watch these movies.
Yeah, but it's more the aspect, like I find, kind of when you watch TNG and you've got Picard, the great diplomat, and he uses his wits and his knowledge and then these new movies, it's just, we'll just batter some guy's face in and then that'll prove what it is. It just seems
all that money they wasted to make those movies, I could have had to make more after the Gold Rush. I think that would have been better.
Yeah. And, well, just probably on it, do you have any hopes for the new Star Trek series coming up in 3 months?
I hope that the show is about ethics, and it is about science, and it is about how we're trying hard to be better people and explore the universe in a way that enriches us and it. And I hope that it's not a melodrama. I worry about that, but my worries don't matter until I see it, so I wish it the very best.
And just say, what's your general impression from what you've seen so far of it?
I was not impressed by the trailer. I didn't see any of the Star Trek that I know and love in the trailer. But trailers, aren't made by the people who wrote the story. They're not made by the actors or the director. They're made by a group that makes trailers. So perhaps that is their vision of the show. They think that's useful for advertising it. But I didn't see any complex conversations or anything interesting. I saw a bunch of action. I saw a bunch of aesthetics that looked like Star Wars, not Star Trek. But like I said, those things can be misleading. So I don't want to bias myself against the show because I didn't like the trailer. So I wish it the very best.
Okay.
Do you have anything else there?
About Star Trek?
Well, I was asking Cal, but
no.
You can. But if you have anything else, you can feel free to rant about anything you want because we're actually.
I don't want to rant. I rant too much. So
yeah, but it's just
I'm a ranty kind of guy.
One thing maybe you could expand upon. This is kind of jumping, but our conversations on this show are never linear in any fashion whatsoever. But what is the process of making a comic from that original idea to getting on the paper? What is the kind of timeline you have to follow? Because I've never been really clear on how it exactly gets to the page.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. So there's the old Marvel method in the 60s, but then there's a modern method. The way that it's done now is, I basically write the script, which is a series of, fact-finding, and I like to take long showers, think of it in the shower. You don't have to do that, but that's what I do. And so, I think the story, I write it down, and then, you normally need to find an artist. I'm lucky to have one. So you have to get an artist, you normally pay the artist, up front to do some stuff, develop the concept art is the very first thing you get done, figure out how you want your characters to look, get your aesthetics down. You send the pages over to the artist, and then they send you back some pencils. These are kind of like rough layouts, different ways they could do the panels, and then you go over them and be like, okay, my vision, because all right, Scout steps out of the ship, you can see, bring the perspective out far so you can see off into the distance, the ground should be lush, lots of green. You don't want a blue sky, and have a good day's look on her face, whatever. And then he'll draw his version of those scenes. I'll pick the ones I think are most accurate to my vision, and we'll go over them. And then you get, after the thumbnail process, you get the hard pencils where all right, this is the way it's going to look. Are we good with that? This is the final version. And he's like, you say yes, and then it gets inked. And after it gets inked, you have what is essentially a finished comic page, but most people want color on their page. So then you get a colorist. Sometimes it's your artist, but sometimes it's not. And then you pay the colorist, and they color over the page based upon your specifications. And then the next step is you get the letterer who adds all the words. And then it comes back to me, lettered, colored, and all done. And then, if you work for a studio, they do this, but I end up doing it, or my roommate helps me. Mm-hmm. We edit the page and get it ready for print, because there's different formats of color and sizing you have to do for digital and print. So we do all that boring stuff. Then once we get it all done, all 32 pages, we send it off to the printer, and they print it off in China. And then it comes on a boat to my house, and then I mail them back to people across the world, and hopefully they like it and buy the next issue so I can pay my rent.
All right. And so how long roughly is it to just get that first issue made from the original idea? I know it can vary depending if you go to a publisher and you get knocked back, sure. But in general, if you've got an idea and you manage to get it published, what kind of time scale are you looking at there?
Comics take about 200 to 250 hours to make, I'd say. So it's a lot of work. After the Golden Shake's a bit longer because I have to get some of the signs checked out, so I have to wait on certain, fancy PhD people to respond to me. But we're actually going to be adding a second artist on after the Gold Rush to speed it up, because people keep complaining it's not coming out fast enough. So it's a lot of work. But like I said, I love comic books as a medium, and after the Gold Rush as a story is very important to me. So it's well worth the work.
It sounds like it's kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Rewarding to know that people are demanding more.
Yeah, that's good. I do feel bad I don't have it out, but number 3 is almost done. We're well ahead of it. So by the time the Kickstarter is done and funded, which it has 19 days to go, it won't be too much longer till we get the book out, because I have a big con in Portland on September, so I want to have the book there. So hopefully I'll get it before then, so we can start shipping them out to people who backed it on Kickstarter.
And how many issues are planned for after the Gold Rush?
I have 25 issues planned in total. So we're finishing up 3, and then 4 is already being drawn preemptively. So we're getting on schedule here.
And it's just a general question. Do you ever encounter, I don't know the best word, but the comic book snobs? I definitely, because I've been in the US briefly, and it's definitely over here in the UK, comic books are quite looked down upon. If you're a grown man reading a comic, they just think, grow up. Are you in your second childhood? So do you ever get any of that? When you tell people I write comics, oh, crikey,
It used to be a lot worse. Growing up, it was that way.
Yeah.
But now everybody likes to call themselves a nerd.
Yeah.
It's kind of in fashion over here. It doesn't mean everybody read comics, but they like to say they like comics. So I think that's gone away less, but it's still around. Growing up, I remember in 5th grade, I got in a fight with a kid. He threw my Spider-Man Unlimited copies into a mud puddle and shit, so that wasn't great. But it's not too bad over here. I've had some people, when I was leading the March for Science, be like, oh, Miles is a comic book writer. What does he know about science? And I'm like, all right, thanks, man. But it's not too bad, but that is a phenomenon that exists.
Yeah, and
but
also
people do tend to think that they're campy and stupid, which is unfortunate, because it's just as powerful as any other medium in the abstract to tell a story.
Also, holdover from way back when comics first came on the scene, they were looked down upon by large portions of society in general as being a waste of time, and I'm thinking 30s, 40s, 50s, that era.
Sure. So Golden Age comics were pretty silly. A bunch of nonsensical, kind of pathetic fallacy stuff happened, or it doesn't make any sense as a plot device, or just logically, how the stories would come out, because they were just throwaway books. They weren't serious. But what happened is they had a few things in there that were just so cool that they outlived the way that they were written. Superman Wonder Woman, Batman, outlived the kind of era they were in to be more important. And then, Jack Kirby with Fantastic Four #1 reinvented comics to be a much more serious medium. And all of the inspirational ideas that Jack Kirby instills into Marvel really kind of changed the way comics were. And then in the 70s, we had Chris Claremont's X-Men. His giant-size X-Men made the international multi-ethnic team that dealt with things like bigotry and stuff, because that was never really in Stan Lee's original X-Men, even though he likes to say that it was. Claremont's the guy who really invented that. And, you have in the 90s a lot of really powerful books like Kingdom Come. So comics grew up a lot. And like you said, people don't always realize that. Sometimes they just remember the campy Golden Age versions, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and I also think it's a lot of people just think comic books has just been superheroes and that's it. And they don't realize it's just a wide-ranging media. There's any story you can imagine, you can tell it via a comic book. Yeah,
comic books can be about anything. Whatever you want to write about. You want to write about ships, or you want to write about working at a laundromat, or you just want, to write about your experience growing up as gay in Alabama, or if you want to write about a pigeon who opens a bakery. It doesn't matter, man. You can do whatever you want to do. Like I said, you get to make a visual story for a lot cheaper than a movie. So I think that comics are great for that. And it's awesome to see so many different things in comics now that we didn't used to get to see.
My personal favorite graphic novel has to be Alan Moore's. Oh, what is it called? Hell? Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
What is it? Oh, what is it called? I have
From Hell, I think it is.
From Hell.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a movie made of it.
Mm-hmm. The movie's terrible, by the way.
Yeah, I don't end up liking a lot of comic movies, unfortunately.
But there is actually quite a neat one that. Have you ever seen the movie American Splendor?
Yes.
Yeah, that's I really enjoyed that. It kind of explores a little bit of the comics industry, and it's a quirky kind of indie movie, but it's well worth watching, I think.
Yeah, I just wish people would, give a bit more respect to comics.
Yeah.
Some of the characters from comics are being adapted into things that people said to think are really great, but they're a poor substitution for comics. Whatever version of Spider-Man you put on film is always going to be just a silhouette of the complexity that he has in the actual comics. So, just like with a real book, like you can watch Lord of the Rings and it's a decent film, but it's nothing compared to the novel. So I hope people will go to the source and see how powerful comics are.
Yeah.
On that note, were you happy with Spider-Man Homecoming?
I'm not going to watch it.
Okay.
I am on a mission to read every single issue of Spider-Man, and I'm almost completed that. And I don't want to watch it. So
fair enough.
I'm too emotionally invested.
Yeah, I actually attempted that at one point. Do you have in the States the Essential Spider-Man volumes? It's like they're all reprinted in black and white on low quality paper.
Yes, we do. But I have those, but in color. But yes, we do have those as well.
I got to about volume 3 and I just gave up because you realize with these long-running comic books, there's a lot of just utterly forgettable things, and then you get a short space that, this is fantastic, but then you have to slog through so much just, like I say, it's not bad, it's just average and forgettable stuff.
Some of it's bad. Because they're just throwing out ideas, and sometimes they're probably tired that week and didn't want to make a big Green Goblin story, so they're like, Kangaroo Jack comes to fight Spider-Man. You're like, okay. So it's fine. And it's been a struggle. The Clone Saga in the 90s was the hardest. It's over 100 issues of a meaningless story that nobody likes, that gets retconned. So reading that was quite hard, but, that's part of the love of comics, man, is just there's so much material, and everything you read kind of adds to the Marvel mythos, even if it's bad. So
yeah, it's like a never-ending adventure.
Yeah,
so I think as we're coming to the end, I would just say maybe for anyone in our audience that's not familiar with comics, what kind of books would you recommend with them? Include obviously your own as well, but just if they want to get started and get it. If they want to get started in comics, what are some of the really good ones to go for?
If you've never read a Marvel book before and you want to start, I would say you should get the book called Marvels, which the art is by Alex Ross. And it basically tells the story of a reporter who started reporting on the early events of Marvel, the things that happened in the Golden Age. So that'd be Namor, Captain America, and the original Human Torch, up until, the creation of the Fantastic Four, the Avengers showing up, Spider-Man showing up, the X-Men. And so it kind of is like a very beautiful, like Alex Ross, essentially it paints in like a classic Roman style almost. So absolutely beautiful, some of the best art you ever see in a comic. That will kind of tell you what happened in the 60s and early 70s of Marvel without having to read it all. So I highly recommend that. Other great places to start are Grant Morrison's new X-Men run, which leads into the very popular Astonishing X-Men, which Joss Whedon wrote. That will begin you on this great story of Marvel about the Phoenix kind of coming back in and these things that happen to the Scarlet Witch. So I highly recommend that. Fantastic Four is one of my personal favorites. Hickman's run on Fantastic Four came out a few years ago. It's collected in all sorts of things. It is the second best Fantastic Four run after Jack Kirby's original. I highly recommend that as well. And if on the DC side, if you want to check out just one DC book, I'd probably recommend either All-Star Superman or Kingdom Come. So those are kind of great like early notes to get you into comics. Yeah. You don't have to read 1,000 issues. You can just read a few things and see a lot of the beauty there. On the independent side, there's a lot of great books, obviously. Sandman is one of the most well-respected. Fables is one of my favorite comics. That is kind of the first of this retelling of old fairy tale stories. Things like Ever After are a cheap theft of that idea. I really recommend Fables. Or Manifest Destiny is a story I'm reading a lot right now from Image, I recommend. So there's tons of great stuff out there, and I hope people check out comics, especially mine.
There's, that's something for me to check out that I hadn't thought of before.
Yeah, I'll definitely dig into some of those. And in closing, where can people find you? We'll have links to all your stuff, but just shout out where people can find you here.
Mine is Miles Greb. If you guys didn't catch that, so if you Google me, you'll find my stuff. But my Twitter is @GoldRushComic. My website is afterthegoldrush.space. I'm on Facebook at, I think it's just After the Gold Rush Comic, or you can just add me, Miles Greb. That's totally fine. On Instagram at just Miles Greb. So yeah, you can check out my stuff. You can go to the Kickstarter right now, which would be awesome. I think that'd be super cool if you guys did that. You can check that out. If you don't like the book, that's awesome. You could share it just to help promote some science comics, or you can back it if you want to read one.
Awesome. Well, thank you a lot for your time and for joining us on the show.
Yeah, good to talk to you guys. Go.
Thank you very much. Science. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Trolling with Logic. If you enjoy this podcast, please consider leaving us a review on iTunes. If you love the show, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Supporting us at $5 or more per episode will get you access to exclusive, patron-only bonus content, early access to shows before everyone else, and other incentives. We are an amateur production, but with your patronage, we can help improve our audio quality and cover the costs for doing the show. We are grateful for anything you can pledge to the show. Go to www.patreon.com/trollingwithlogic to sign up if you are so inclined. We want to thank our 3 patrons who currently have chosen to support us. These patrons are Microbloganism, Josh at the Society for the Advancement of Science, and Avinash Kumar. Thank you very much for your support, which is helping us out. Thanks to you 3, we have now been able to hire a professional audio editor, so now you can all look forward to higher quality audio. If you have any suggestions for topics or guests you would like to hear on this show, let us know on Twitter or on our Facebook page. Thanks again for listening.
You
to that clarification later on in the course of the show, I'm sure. Let's start off with a little of your background and where you're coming from. Have you always been into comics, sci-fi, fantasy, that kind of thing?
Probably. So my very first comic I ever got was my grandma bought me the first Marvel trade paperback. It was a collection of number ones, like Fantastic Four number one and Journey into Mystery, Amazing Fantasies 15. And she got me that at a yard sale when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And ever since then, I really loved comics. But I was kind of poor growing up, so I couldn't always get them. So I was always like scavenging at yard sales or Goodwill to find them. But I've been a comic fan as soon as I knew what they were and, had the ability to acquire them.
Cool. What would you say is the main value in comics and or graphic novels as a medium for storytelling?
Sure. Why I love comics so much is you get to have a visual and storytelling medium. But unlike film, which is in a lot of ways superior as a visual medium, you don't have as quite a big of budgets, so you don't have as many cooks in the kitchen. So it is kind of selected to be more creative in that way. Because, if you're making a film for $10 million, you can't really afford to do something super crazy that no one's ever done before that often, because if you fail, you're out $10 million, right? It costs $3,000-$4,000 to make a single issue of a comic book. And so you're like, oh, well, we tried something new and it failed. People can still eat and don't lose their jobs afterwards. And so I think that is something that's really benefited comics for a long time, which is why they're harvested by Hollywood so much now, I think. I also like the really intimate nature of comic books. Because, you spend a lot of time with the series. It comes out every couple of months, and you pick up the issue, and then you read it alone, and there's lots of details there, and they always kind of build on themselves in a more complicated way, even than
that it made the genetically modified stuff.
Yeah, I'm trying not to be heavy-handed about it, which is just like, fuck yeah, GMOs, but, it will definitely come to the story more. Also, there's a little prequel webcomic that I made where you can see her actually using an advanced version of CRISPR that I call Cold Snap to genetically modify her plants. For example, she's trying to add bee carotenes into her plants in order to strengthen them, hopefully resist the high levels of nitrogen that are in the atmosphere. So, I'm sprinkling as much hard science in as I can.
Yeah, and I really geeked out at the reference to Mary Anning, the paleontologist from the 18th century. I thought that was pretty brilliant, and was even more excited when I got to the end and saw the spread at the well, not the spread, but the full page
splash.
Full page splash at the end, giving a little bit more info. I think that's a great way to introduce lesser known figures and lesser known big names in science.
Yeah.
Or people who should be big names but aren't.
Sure. Yeah. So every issue we're going to have a scientist of the issue. Normally they're in some way related to what happened in the story. So, I've always really liked Mary Anning. So, she's the first one, and Stalk is the second one. And then I think the third book we do Rosalina Frank. So
awesome.
I wanted to ask, is it quite difficult trying to translate the scientific method, which can be to a lot of outside folk, if you show them what goes on in a lab every day, this is quite dry and boring. Is that quite a challenge to represent in a graphic novel in an exciting way?
So I have her do some actual science in the webcomic more, because she's back on Titan. And the series itself, after the Gold Rush, like I said, it's about skepticism, atheism, and hard science. It follows Scout. She's the last scientist, and she grew up on Titan, but something went wrong, and so she's put into cryosleep. But then her ship automatically sends her back to Earth. So her ship, the Beagle 2, takes a long journey from Titan back to Earth, and then she arrives. But she doesn't find it this kind of Star Trek utopia like she was expecting. It is a really lush wilderness. It's not a post-apocalyptic world. Something else has happened. But there's been a major paradigm shift. So Scout, who knows a lot about biology and chemistry, is going to have to try to figure out what to do in this world and see if she can help return science. But she's just a 16-year-old girl. She's pretty socially awkward, so she's going to have a hard time relating to these people who have no idea what science is, especially since they're pretty superstitious and believe in a lot of magical thinking. And she's never even really heard of religion or any of the kind of superstitions that we might know of today. And that's the rundown.
All right.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating premise.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, and I've read the first issue and thought it was pretty impressive. I like the idea of the main character not falling into kind of the pop culture stereotype trope of the doctor scientist.
Yeah, doctor scientist, yeah.
Yeah, she actually has a specialty. She's a biologist, is that correct?
Yep, she's a biologist and she knows a bunch of chemistry too, because she basically, her main role was to genetically engineer plants to try to survive in Titan's atmosphere, which is, a hard task. But that is her role, so most of the science she knows is based upon agriculture and bioengineering.
Yeah, I was going to mention the GMO aspect as well, that I believe it's only on one page, but I loved the kind of cameo appearance.
A novel, because a novel can make sure to point things out to you. They're like, hey, don't forget that we've been mentioning this over time. But in a comic, there's a lot of visual clues, so you really need to have a relationship with the work to get everything out of it.
Yeah, what you're kind of saying is there's a lot more subtlety to a comic than a novel.
Yeah. I mean, not always. There's 90s comics where it's just big muscle man versus the dumb ninjas.
Yeah.
And he saves, big titty girl, and then it ends. But the medium is capable of doing a lot more. So.
Yeah, so let's get into the project you're currently working on. Give us a rundown of kind of the inception of After the Gold Rush and what it's all about.
Sure. After the Gold Rush is the first comic I ever made. I made it about 2 years ago, and it's kind of the one that's most close to my heart. So basically, I was at Emerald City Comic-Con, which is a really big con up here. And, there's like this big trend in comics to be more inclusive to all these groups and kind of like add a voice to people who don't have them. And I was walking around and I didn't see any books that were openly atheist books, no books talking about skepticism. I didn't see a single book that was really focused on science. Of course, everybody has cool feats of engineering on the kind of general sci-fi trend, but no book was kind of like, this is what the scientific method is. These are people who, have a history in science. Nothing was actually talking about it as a methodology. And so I was like, well, damn, I think I could do that. And so I started, working and creating the concept for After the Gold Rush. And then I sold off my magic collection to get enough money to pay some artists to help me with concept art. And then I was really lucky to get on Skeptic's Guide to the Universe when I was just kind of kicking it off. And thankfully, because of that, a lot of people paid attention to it. And the first Kickstarter went really well. And now we're making the series. We need a fake green Cold War where the nations compete against each other to solve climate change. We need like a conspiracy between Russia, China, and America where they all just agree to pretend like they're in a Cold War, and then get ready like the capitalists and the populists and get all that money and labor working to fix the problem.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Trolling with Logic, where we bring the hammer down on ignorance, unreason, and superstition on a weekly basis. I'm Nathan Dickey, your host, and Cal is the only one with me today as the other regular host. How's it going, Cal?
It's great, and you're actually saying weekly without having to double check yourself there. So you managed to get that down smoothly now.
Yep, so that's a good sign going forward. Today we welcome as our special guest Miles Greb. Miles is one of the biggest sci-fi and fantasy nerds I know, and as well as a comic writer, folk singer, and science outreach advocate. He's created and written a few science and skepticism based comics in the optimistic sci-fi tradition, including Clovis and After the Gold Rush. Welcome to the show, Miles Greb.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it. And most of what you said is true, and the rest is exaggeration.
Oh, okay. And I guess we'll get into